How many of you have seen the show? Oh, good.
Almost
Pretty
everybody,
much,
yeah,
almost
cool.
everybody, good.
Right.
So I'm just curious, just start at the beginning. How did it happen that the show even was created?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Steve Wolf, the late Steve Wolf, used to run, he was the artistic director of St. Louis Repertory Theater. And what happened was, I can't believe this. In August, it'll be 8 years since Michael Brown was shot. And so that was 2014. 2015, he approached me and he said, I would like to do a theater piece to bring about some sort of conversation with people. Here we go. It's interesting being in the South because the most segregated city in the United States actually is Milwaukee, Wisconsin, believe it or not. And St. Louis is like the third or the fourth. And during between 2012 to 2015, about 80 or 90 black men were pulled aside for driving crazy or what have you, because we're looking at one of the most segregated cities within the U.S. Like, for instance, let's say you're here. I don't know what part of Charleston am I in?
Downtown.
Okay, so the way they divided the city. So you have downtown Charleston, then North Charleston will have another mayor. There'll be a mayor here, and it becomes a totally new city. In order for money to go into those cities, what would happen is that they would stop black men or brown people of color, which obviously is of color, and then charge them $100 for speeding. And then if they don't have the money, then the next day it goes up to $200, it goes up to $300. So there was a lot of violence against people of color. So he wanted, and then when Michael Brown hit, that was like the epitome of. And so he wanted to use theater as a means to create some sort of conversation.
And how did you feel about being asked to do it?
I was flattered. What I said to him was, the person who's a master at this in terms of documentary theater, and I didn't want to do documentary theater, is a woman called Anna Devere Smith. And you know Anna Devere Smith. And so I said, I want this to be a play, and what you saw, for those of you who saw it, they're composite figures. So what happened was, I was introduced to a community activist, and I was in this place in Ferguson where, like, for 3 or 4 days in 2015, interviewed people and said, listen, I don't have the right to play you. I don't feel comfortable playing you, but what's happened here affects all of us. So I did that and came up with these composite figures, and then 2016, we just started doing it.
When you create a composite figure, you interviewed, 60, 80 people for hours?
Yeah, it was like in this restaurant for like 4 days. It was just continuous. And the question that I threw out was, how does this shooting affect you? And I just let people talk.
And it affected everybody, black, white, old, young, male, female.
Everybody, it affected everybody.
And when you started absorbing these stories, was it hard to get them to talk, or did it just...
You'd be surprised how anxious people were to talk.
Really?
Really.
Huh.
I mean, and I guess it's just let them, it was very fresh. I mean, St. Louis is a very triggered city in so many ways. And I can't quite pinpoint why that is. Maybe it's because it is so divided. Maybe that's what that is, I don't know. But people at that particular time were so anxious, because you come across people who thought, I thought we went through this already, but we hadn't. And so that's what I think it was.
In creating the composite characters that you did, how did you select? How did you figure out that you needed a Louisa Hemphill and a Rusty Hardin and a Doug Ray and a Hassan? You made choices that you didn't have to make. You could have made different choices.
Because even though it's certainly race plays a role, I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts that it plays a role, but also we wanted to get into what was human. We wanted an array of characters so we could see how it affected a lot of people. Because I think to a certain degree, certainly we're dealing with racism, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, but we're also looking at toxic masculinity. We're looking at the sins of the father, the sins of the mother. We're looking at these two hurt men.
Meaning Darren Wilson and
Darren Wilson
Michael
and
Brown.
Michael Brown, who met each other, as well as definitely, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about the race thing, but we're also talking about two men who came from very abusive backgrounds.
So in that respect, they have some equivalents.
I can tell you, you want to hear it?
Yeah.
Darren Wilson was born May 13th, 1986. Michael Brown was born May 20th, 1996. Both were roughly 6'3", 6'4". Both were born to single teenage mothers. Darren Wilson's mother, by the time she was 35, her last husband, because she was married about 3 or 4 times, she was a grifter. They would go from place to place, and let's say you befriended, this woman. Oh, you're going away from the weekend? I'll watch your house for you. And as soon as you came back, she'd manage to get into your computer and get your business, and she'd go on someplace else. His mother, by the time she was 34, she had him at age 19. Michael Brown's mother had him when she was like 16 or 17. I did interview Michael Brown Sr., so, I mean, max now, he's 51, 52. And if Michael were here, Michael would be 27. So we're looking at, and also again, her mother, Michael Brown Sr., his mother had him when she was about 16 or 17. Leslie McFadden, who's the mother of Michael Brown Jr., had, again, like I said, she had him when she was about 16 or 17. Her mother, the same thing. So we're looking at intergenerational abuse, early pregnancy, and both those things come hand in hand.
At that terrible moment.
At that terrible moment.
Now, when you you ask the question to each of the people you talk to, what does the shooting mean to you? Did you have to answer that question of yourself?
Yes, because I'm going to say something that's sticky, but I think I'm someone who, because I'm from and live in New York, I'm somebody who hangs out with all kinds of people. When I dated, because I have no interest in doing it these days, I'm too old, I'm not thinking about this thing. But when I dated, I think racially I didn't care about, or ethnically, whatever happens. But I think everybody in this room has a racist within them. When somebody makes you mad, the first thing you reach for, or a lot of times the first thing you reach for is that. Could I live my life like that? No, but we do have these triggered moments where we do tend to think that way. And so when people were talking, like people would say stuff like, I thought I got over this. Because sometimes they would think in terms of race, they would think in terms of ethnicity, they would think in terms of, another sex,
Every single one of the characters in the play, it's front and center in their minds. Even if they feel, I think of the character Connie Ham. To me, she's almost paired with Edna Lewis, the minister, in the sense that she is a white liberal who had a black friend and doesn't understand why it can't go on like that and what went wrong.
Right.
And she crosses the divide, or tries to. You have Edna Lewis, who, as a minister, successfully crosses the divide, right, and is able to pray for the black National Guardsman and the white cop. But race is right there.
Race is right there, because I think in certain instances you really have to talk, it's uncomfortable, and you have to give yourself permission to be uncomfortable, to ask those questions and not just automatically assume that you get it.
When you created Edna Lewis, as opposed to Connie Ham, why did Edna Lewis succeed in, at some level, bridging the gap and praying for both black and white in people with guns, and Connie Ham couldn't understand what went wrong, and it did go wrong?
Well, I think because also with Edna, I think she made using that character, she took more chances. First of all, she was born black and female. And then also she, again, had an affair with a woman. And then she also married a white man. So I think she was more open to experiences than, say, Connie is.
Why was Connie, why did she fail and what did she not understand?
I think, I don't consider it a failure as much as it is naivete. Because again, it's something that they all have in common. You know, Connie talks about how the way she was beaten by her husband. She also talks about how the way she was beaten as a child by her father, and the father also beat her mother. So I tend to think with people who are abused, because even if you look at her body language, there's a lot of fear within her. And see, a lot of these, you know, these, like I said, they're all composites. You have to, even with someone like Doug Ray, you know, that's the hardcore racist guy. You notice that he's a well-read man. The thing that I wanted, it's easy just to harp on race, yeah? But what I also wanted to look at was, again, how all of these characters hurt. What creates that hurt? One is not born bigoted. You're not born bigoted.
Well, he was busy creating a son who was busy.
But also he talked about how the way his father was a drunk and beat the hell out of him and beat the hell out of his siblings. I love the fact that he was a self-made man, but what ends up happening a lot of the time when people try to when they come from an abusive background, the very thing they can't stand about the people that raised them, they end up becoming.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, that's documented in a lot of scientific research as well.
Sure.
With alcoholism, with abuse, and so on.
All of it, all of it. All of it, yes. So I certainly, like I said, we had to talk about the racial issue, but also what needed to be talked about. What I wanted to see is the human and the humane, and not judge them, because if you judge them, they become caricatures. Like, I don't think that Doug Ray is a caricature.
No.
Right.
And he didn't understand. You sit in the audience and you see these characters in terms of your own frame of reference as to good and evil, and what's right and wrong. And I, looking at Doug Ray, it sort of watched the mounting evidence of evil, and yet you could see his starting point wasn't evil, and that each one of the characters, not one of them could see themselves as bad people even if they had bigoted views. That all those characters had that in common. Why did you give them that gift?
The people that I met were questioning themselves that way, and also, again, I'm interested in. Besides this, I'm also interested in the darker side of nature. And again, it's also about theater: beginning, middle, end, story, conflict, resolution. So
how does that work in terms of the arc of how these characters appear and speak? And
what is their struggle? What are they struggling with? What do they want? Can they see it? Can they not see it?
The barber can't see it.
The barber can see it, because I think he's the one character. He says, because when he talks about it, he says he wants to know the truth about the Michael Brown shooting. It's like, he says, again, he says Darren Wilson should be treated fairly, Michael Brown should be treated fairly. So he's the one character who has no problem at all in that regard. It's like he wants to see.
Huh.
Yeah. Because also until it comes to Michael Brown, again, obviously, it's like, again, we know that, again, I'm going to go back to the racial aspect of it. But in terms of interviewing certain people, there were conflicts. By that, what I mean is, certain people said that Michael Brown reached for Darren Wilson's gun. Other people said that did not happen, yet other people said you better change your testimony. They were told you better change your testimony.
Huh. And what was the prevailing thought among the people that you interviewed?
All of that, because again, there's no conclusive answer. Yeah. I mean, obviously, it's, a policeman's job is hard. People who are in the military, it's hard. The violence has to be the last resort. But a lot of times it's not the last resort. And you've also got it's interesting how the way Darren Wilson was born to a grifter, and he chose the most straight edge job, that being a cop.
Why do you think that is?
Because I think that's his only way of trying to find a structure for himself, because there was no structure. And it can't get any more structured than that.
And it comes up over and over again about the idea of somebody with a gun. I think at one point somebody says, I think it's the Rusty Hardin, I think, is the one who says, all they see is a white man with a gun. Mm-hmm. But that's echoed in what the younger black characters say. They're worried about that.
Because that's exactly what happened, and that's exactly what happens.
And you have Hassan who says, who just wants out, and he does exactly what Rusty Hardin kind of sets up. They want me to shoot them. They dare me to shoot them.
Well, there's I don't know if you guys know this term, suicide by cop. You do know it? Okay, where you have a child who grew up the way he did, and they feel that there's no way out. And again, if you look at that background, intergenerational abuse. Because what I wanted to look at in terms of the characters, even though you don't see Michael Brown, you don't see Darren Wilson, and this is in general, we have not created a space for men to talk about how they feel. Ironically enough, the thing that's kicking in that's making that happen is the Johnny Depp case. But prior to that, there's no place for men to talk about how the way they feel, and double that with men of color. There's definitely no place, because there's a certain kind of machismo that comes with it, which is a survival technique, or certain people think. And they've been made to feel in order for you to be a man, you have to be aggressive, you have to be a badass. And what ends up happening is that badass, that aggression, that toxic masculinity ends up killing you, figuratively and or literally. And where can men talk about things? You know, it's like when you talk about, like, it was like, again, I'm going back to the Depp case just for a hot second. When he talked about like how the way he was abused as a kid by his mother. Darren Wilson was abused by his mother. I mean, by her being a grifter. We tend to think just because someone can give birth, that makes them maternalistic, or, you know, our definitions of masculinity and femininity. You know, if one is in touch with their feelings, they're in touch with their feminine side. If someone's aggressive, they become in touch with their masculine side. Those definitions are archaic, and they simply just don't apply. It's not as simple as that. I've met certain women who had no business having kids.
Sure.
Yeah, and I've met very nurturing men.
Yeah.
So, but again, you cannot say that, because when people are trying to survive, given where they come from, it's not as simple as that.
In creating these characters, how do you sit there listening to 60, 80 people and interviewing them and listening to them talk? How do you do that without judging them and holding in whatever your actual feelings are, so that you don't alienate them, or so that you don't turn into a journalist asking questions like I would?
Because I think you asked me that we had a Zoom before we spoke.
Right.
Again, my emphasis in also having a very smart director, Neil Keller, wave up, Neil. It's still about the theater, and again, when we would sit down and talk about these characters, which are the ones that are really, that can add to this piece. We've only got an hour and 15 minutes, but the thing about it is, what will bring the piece home? And also, again, as I was talking to certain people, what made it easy to edit, for lack of a better term, is because I was aware how certain people were putting on, because they realized that they were being interviewed, and it's just...
They were performing for you.
Some of them were performing, so I'm like, this is not working, but, you know.
But
so I knew it was, there was certain, like the character who Hassan is based on, he was adorable. And he was like, you want to hear a rap? You know? But also he told me about his background, and it was interesting. When he was, and this woman should be locked up, when he was 15, he had an affair with a woman who was 34, and she got pregnant.
Wow, what happened?
Nothing happened with her, but he says, I have a child out there, and I have no access, because she got back with her husband, and then she moved away, and I don't know where she is.
So he has no idea where his
He has no idea where it's a son. He said it was a son. He has no idea. But also, again, this woman who did this is a pedophile.
Yeah. But it left him with all those unresolved emotions and issues. And
Yeah, because at points when he was talking to me about certain things that happened in his background, he was crying, and I said again, some of this is going to be in some of it, and I said I'm not playing you, but his story does stay with me.
Was that real person that you, to whatever degree you based your performance on, was he as angry as the character in the play?
Yes.
And did you have a sense that he would die before he was 25?
I hope he's still here. If he's still here, it could go either way. It could go either way with him. But he was explosive. He was walking this thin line.
When you were talking to all these people, did you in your own heart judge them?
No, believe it or not, no. The Doug Ray character, actually, I never spoke with. There was this guy. That character came about because as I'm sitting in this restaurant for 4 days, that man would look at me like very hard, very hard. And at one point, and for those of you, excuse my language, I said, "Who's this asshole?" Right? And I asked somebody, and then he said, "Well, this guy comes in every day. He's from West Virginia. He's a vet. He's a Vietnam vet. For some strange reason, he likes us. He comes in all the time." And I looked over at him. He was actually reading Crime and Punishment.
Huh. And this is a restaurant in Ferguson?
Yes.
Where the population is pretty much black and the cops are all white?
Yeah, now it's changed.
Well,
it had to change. But I was looking over, and I found him, and he would wear army fatigues. And I found him to be an interesting, this guy. I didn't want to talk to him, but he would be looking, and doing that whole thing. So and he goes, yeah, he's pretty much self-taught. So that's how Doug Ray came about.
Now, did somebody round up people to talk to you?
There was a guy called Ed Reggie, who's a wonderful political activist, and he introduced me to these people. And so I would meet them, and there was another place I met, but it was like mainly it was actually the barbecue place that's mentioned, in Flood.
Now, as we've talked and so on and so forth, as a journalist, my job is to maintain distance from the people that I interview and so on. And I was based in South Africa for 3 years during apartheid, 87, 88, 89. And when you work in South Africa, if you have eyes and ears, you see and hear, at least in those days, absolute evil at the same time you saw heroism and good. And there were complexities to that, but there were people that you considered in your heart, or that I considered in my heart, absolutely evil, who were the perpetuators of the apartheid system, who in one way or another were responsible for the people who were beaten and attacked and killed and so on and so forth in the government and so on. And the way I tried to figure out how to do my job was to bend over backwards, to be super polite, and to in a sense give them more rope, more leeway, but more rope to hang themselves. I hoped than I would people who maybe I thought more like they did, or I believed in what they represented, because I was so worried about being fair to them, knowing what I really felt. And I wondered about that as I was watching or thinking about the people you interviewed and how you created three-dimensional characters that had humanity, even though, like Doug Ray, they turn out odious.
Right. Again, I try to figure, I look at certain people, and I look at people, and I go, this person was once a child. That's literally, what created that? How did you get to this place? I don't have to like you, but I have to understand you. In order for me to write this and do this, I have to understand you. I cannot judge you, otherwise that person will come off as a caricature. And sometimes when I meet certain people I dislike, a couple of things I'll think: am I seeing an aspect of myself that I don't like? Why am I uncomfortable with this person? Because sometimes it's not even as, for lack of a term, black and white as it. Because sometimes I'll look at people and going, am I looking at something about me that I don't like? So it's important that I sit down and wrestle with that.
Was it hard to write? Did you go through periods where you just have to walk away
Yes.
or cry or?
Yes, because also after that time, because again, right after that there was, I can't even keep up with what was happening in this country in terms of, men of color and stuff, because every place we went, there was, Neil at one point even said, should we add something? I said, we can't keep up with the shootings. That's the only way I can put that, And so it was very difficult, and it still is.
The places that you've performed at, a lot of them have had shootings themselves. What's it been like to perform this show in places like Charleston, where right down the street, you've got practically around the corner down the street, you've got the AME church?
I'm not going to lie to you, I was very nervous about doing this piece here. I was very nervous, about coming to the South, because, well, again, like one thing about the South is that the South is very much so in your face. Having said that, because my mother is from here, and I hadn't been here in 30 years. I used to come. She's from a small town called Bunno. So like my relatives are from Bunno, Jamestown, St. Stephen, all of those, And I remember as a kid what they were like. And so, and actually when I got here, because again, this part of town, it's kind of like for those of you who know New York, when you stay in a hotel at 42nd Street, that's not really New York, It's like when you're down here, this is not really the way things are. It's like when you get into the burbs, when you get into the country, you see, But I was nervous. I was definitely nervous. But it's also amazing how Charleston now is becoming so diverse. But there's still, going to be, the enclave of, there's still going to be that.
You talk in the play about, several characters talk about...
You got to turn off your phone, darling.
When you're bigoted, with people who are bigoted, at least you know where you stand. As opposed to other people who it's not clear, maybe because in the sense of the characters that they're do-gooders or they're this or they're that. Yeah. Is that something that you've found to be true, or is that the characters talking and their perception?
I think there are certain people who don't realize that that they are bigoted. There are certain people who do. It's like, when people say, well, you stay on your side of town, I stay on my side of town, don't marry so-and-so. It's like, I think, white to stay with white, black or Jewish, whatever it is. And that is a form of bigotry when people say, I respect it. I just don't want any black people, I don't want any white people within my family. You stay on your side of town, I stay on my side of town. It's when people talk like that, that is a form of bigotry, even though they're saying it under the guise of liberalism. It's like an accepted separatism. I accept the fact that you're going to live there, and I don't have to really deal with you. You don't have to deal with me, because lack of integration means retrogression. Retrogression means extinction.
Huh. Going back to my experience in South Africa, I've met a lot of well-meaning white liberals who thought they were opposed to apartheid, but in their own lives they had, some of them 2, 3, 4 black servants who took care of their kids, took care of their houses, took care of their pools, whatever.
Sure.
And they were paternalistic. And they didn't understand, the people in our family, the black people who work for our family, of course they're happy. I mean, you hear that sort of thing.
All the time. They even say they're almost part of our family.
Right, but in that context, where it was outside of an American context, where I could look at it and see it from that distance because it was South African, it was very interesting to see because looking at it as a journalist in another country, I could see that this paternalism, as well-meaning as it was a form of racism.
Well, see, Kofi Annan, you said, you learn to listen to what's being said and what's not being said. And hopefully, like with theater, and for those of you who go to the theater, it keeps you aware. Lack of awareness is the thing that creates the bigotry, when people keep themselves in their individual bubbles, yeah? So at what point, one thing I do wrestle with is, in certain instances with certain people, how could you not know? Do you really keep yourself that removed? And sometimes that's when I become impatient.
Now, what's it been like in different cities? Have you had different kinds of responses in different cities and different countries?
Well, I mean, we were really afraid because when we did it in St. Louis, because again, Michael was shot August 9th, 2014. 2015, I began to do the piece 2016. It's only, I was afraid to be in St. Louis, and people in St. Louis were a lot of people said thank you. Because the expectation with the piece was they assumed that I was going to automatically say that, he was murdered. It's much more complicated than that. I mean, obviously, again, the racial aspect of, people of color being pulled over, to keep monies going into these individual towns, Like I say, let's say if that happened, North Charleston having a mayor in a whole different city versus downtown Charleston having a whole different city, But it's just so simply, it's much more complex than that. So people were going, thank you, I'm glad this is happening. And I don't know whether it created some sort of talk, maybe it did, I hope it did.
Have you gone back to St. Louis to perform it?
No, I haven't. I haven't gone back.
I wonder if it would be different now, whether you'd see any kind of evolution of response because time has passed.
I know that there's a black chief, I believe, in Ferguson at this point now. I really haven't gone.
Was the response, say, different in Milwaukee than it was in St. Louis, or different in Berlin or someplace?
Well, Milwaukee, again, like I'm saying, the most segregated city within the United States. There was a guy, I shouldn't call this man's name, but because I had to block him on Facebook, named Mark Hansen. And he said, put your big girl pants on, this is not the South 70 years ago. Darren Wilson's life is totally messed up because of Michael Brown. I know that, again, I understand that there was bigotry, and I emailed him and I said, the play hasn't even opened yet, and you're shooting off your mouth. And I said, it doesn't take sides. I said, it looks at the shooting from different people's perspective. Oh, I'm sorry, then let's keep the conversation going. It's like, no, I don't want to talk to you anymore. So it's like, that was kind of the response. And actually in St. Louis, there was a guy, they have we were in Webster Grove because we did it at the theater, at the college, like the college is connected. And there is a strip mall, right? So next to there's like a ballet shop, then there's the strip mall, then there's a 24-hour gym. And a lot of times after work, I would just go straight to the gym. And there was me and this guy, and this is the biggest man I've ever seen in my life. And it was just me and him in this gym. And he goes, you're that woman that wrote that play? I said, yeah. And while I'm somebody, the more afraid I get, the more mouthy I get, so the person wouldn't know. And so I'm looking around with something in case I have to hit this son of a bitch, And so he was like, oh, you wrote that play? And I said, yeah, and? Yeah, okay. And he just kind of shot me a dirty look, but otherwise that was it. But Milwaukee was the one. And there were people in Milwaukee who a few people walked out, another guy going, throughout the whole thing. So I guess maybe it hit home. Or again, it's just, look, not everybody's going to like what you do. Maybe he just simply didn't like it, or maybe some of it hit home. I don't know.
What would you like the play to achieve? I mean, you
create conversation, invoke and provoke talk. I'm not a politician, and for people who hold themselves up as examples, it's like you watch that because I'm one of the most flawed people I know. But I'm hoping that somehow make some sort of impact where you can individuate and have a conversation about it.
When you do the play and sort of 90% or 80% of the audience is white, is that okay, or would you prefer to have it? I mean, here I looked around the first night, and 80 to 90% of the audience was not only white but over 65.
Right. Well, I'm not far from 65 either, because I used to knock that.
I'm way over, so.
I'm a few years short of 65 because I'm 62. So yeah, black don't crack, man. You know that. It's interesting that on the one hand, of course, I want a more diverse audience, but it's interesting that an audience of a certain age will come to see a certain piece. That's also very telling. Who wants to be challenged?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's also interesting. But sure, I want it more diverse. But yeah, but when an audience comes and you look and you go, how? My thing is, do you know what you're coming to see? And then if you do, and if you stick around, that's also telling.
What tends to be when you have black audiences, what tends to be the reaction? Or
Yes. They go, yes. Yes. Right. And there was one woman, though, that was angry. I don't want to think about this anymore. I lived through it. I don't want to think about it anymore.
Huh.
Yeah.
If you took Louisa Hemphill and switched out I see the arc of the show, but what if you mixed and matched the order? Would that how would that affect what you were working to do?
Neil and I spoke about that, and it's like when she talks about being a child of the 60s, and for those people who grew up in the 60s, there was the upheaval, right? And then she thought she, for lack of a better term, overcame. And at the end, when we find out she really didn't, when she says, I'm wrestling this, when the insecurity of is like, I lived through the 60s and the 70s, and now I'm back there again, and I thought I had the answer. So that's why we used her as the end, because it's like, there is still the struggle. There is still the inner stuff that goes on.
She seemed very open-minded.
Yeah.
I'm talking about these characters like they're real people.
Yeah. Well, they're She realizes that she still has work to do, which is actually great.
Now, the monologue at the end.
The poem at the end?
Yeah.
Monologue poem?
Well, yeah, it's a poem. It's a lovely poem.
Thank you.
Again, when you talk about, the wake-up call, has the wake-up call been answered? And then at the end, soon. What are you trying? Is it that it hasn't been answered?
I believe in hope. I believe in possibility. So that's why we talked about there is possibility. It's beginning to happen slowly.
Because of Black Lives Matter and...
Well, we did, it's funny because this was really at the beginning. We didn't write this because people equate this with Black Lives Matter. It didn't happen like that. It's like we wrote this before that happened, actually. It was just on the verge of.
But then what's happened over the time that there's been such an accumulation...
Indeed.
...of George Floyd and Buffalo and all the others in between. What has that done to the weight of the show and the way it's received and
it's speaking to and with all those things that are happening. And it was interesting because before this I was in Berlin doing this. We were in Berlin about 7 weeks ago, and again it's there's a large Afro-German population, and of course we know what happened during World War II. So that it really resonated. And the Doug Ray character there, when he talks about Eamon Garth and when he talks about Darren Wilson. Eamon Garth, for those of you who don't know who Eamon Garth was a Nazi officer that worked with Hitler. And I forgot where he was. I think he was in Bergen-Belsen. And he was responsible for the death of, I think, 3,000, 4,000 Jews. Now, ironically enough, his daughter had a baby with a black man. and his granddaughter is named Jennifer Teichner. And she found out that her grandfather was Amon Garth. And she has written about what it's like for her being Afro-German, and also something clicked. She came across a book and she realized it, and she looks like him except, her skin is brown and she's a woman. And so she's dealing with that now. Her mother was a full-blown alcoholic. I guess you would be.
Having that heritage.
And that heritage. And also, if you get a chance, this is just on the side, there's a documentary called The Offspring of Hitler, where there are, I think, 3 or 4 generations. Well, there's 2 generations. There are a couple of people who actually sterilized themselves so they would not have any more children.
Huh.
Not bring any more Hitler children into the world.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, when you perform in a place like Berlin or, say, Northern Ireland or someplace where there is some sort of racial or cultural strife, do people recognize themselves?
They
and
do
look
recognize
in
themselves.
They don't just say, "Oh, that's
No,
all that they do in
the
America."
Irish can talk about what it's like being indentured servants. But you also have now, there is a large Afro-Irish population. Ireland and Berlin, I mean, Galway is still, Galway is just beginning to get integrated, but the Afro-Germans, we had conversations about this, and actually they were saying, I wish, it didn't take your piece to bring it here. I wish people would talk about us here. And I'm actually working with Afro-Irish writers right now with the Irish Rep in New York, and they're writing their stories about what happens with them. Because this generation now is people born from, say, 86 to 98, 99. You have now more mixed race kids than you've ever had, and and we're leaning toward that kind of world, which is what's supposed to happen. And so those kids are beginning to talk about what's happening with them. When we were in Galway, there was a Nigerian guy, young guy. His father was a lorry cab driver. And he talked about how the way he was targeted, he and his friends would be targeted in Galway.
The same way.
Mm-hmm. And his father said, sometimes he said, he'd have a lot of drunks in his car, and they don't want to pay him. He would go to the police station, and the police would say, I don't know what you're talking about. You should be glad that we let you in here.
So it's not that different.
It's not just,
So they don't just dismiss it and say, well, this is only stuff that happens in America.
No, and also again in Ireland, I spent a lot of time in Ireland, and, there were a lot of people who talked about this is the way, me as a Catholic or me as a Protestant got treated when I went to Dublin, or and I spent some time in Belfast. That was a mind blower, So it's it does. People look at how ethnic groups, how it applies to them. And also, again, racism, the people of color, how it applies to them. In certain ways, it applies to a lot of different people. But it was Doug Ray, because me and Neil talked about that. I'm watching people as I do Doug Ray, especially when I lift and do the gun thing about gunning down these guys. Again, their history with Jews, they know. With Amon Garth, I watched somebody go just like this. When I mentioned that character, when I mentioned Amon Garth, they went just like this, and I'm watching people look down. Because they know what happened during World War.
Would you say that the reaction in other countries is a similar reaction to the reaction in this country, or different, where people look inward in a different way?
I think they look inward in a different way, but also, here we go, there was a woman who talked about, how the way, the white people in the States, ... And I said, I don't mean to, rock your world. I said, but white people in the States are not this entity in and of themselves. They're the descendants of Europeans. And I said, you were the cats that did it. I said, so, I said, they're not this entity in and of themselves. I've come across, bigotry in Europe. I was going there's a place the first time I set foot in Ireland, this was in, 1998, 1999. I'm going across this place called the Halfpenny Bridge, right? And these kids went, ooh, 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 scratching themselves as like a monkey.
In Ireland.
Dublin.
Wow. The fact that you is doing a piece like this, is it a mission for you to do work like this, to create theater like this? And some of your other pieces have involved not only race, but class and race and hierarchy and race and so on and so forth. Is that what you've always wanted to do because it's a mission for you, or would you like to be doing other subject matter as well?
I do other subject matter, but the thing is that a lot of times people expect me to write about simply race and all of that, and I want to write. To use this corny term, there's a wonderful Scottish poet called Robert Burns, and he talks about people being citizens of the world, and that's how the way I operate in the world.
And so essentially, black playwrights and performers and so on can be kind of pigeonholed.
It's a given I'm black, it's a given I'm female, but I consider myself a playwright and an actor. I'm proud of being black and female, but when I'm working, I'm a playwright, I'm an actor. I should be able, and I do, write about anything I feel like writing about.
But that's your approach as opposed to somebody who might commission or employ you. Do you find that that's a barrier for?
Yeah, it is. For certain people it is, but it's, and I know who to send plays to and who not to send plays to, even though, again, it's pain in the tuchus, but.
I mean, it's a weird thing because on the one hand, that's what you've encountered. On the other hand, there's the whole issue of cultural appropriation, where suddenly it's taboo in many respects for say a white man to write about black women, or even about white women, or people trying to write.
The cancellation culture is so dangerous because you've now become the oppressor. When we start banning books, when we start banning plays, when we start telling people what they can and cannot write, you now have taken, as Rubin says, you've taken on the very bigotry that you're trying to, go against. Somebody wanted to do Until the Flood, and they said, till it came to the Doug Ray character, can we not use the word nigger or kike? I said, I've yet to come across the racist who abbreviates themselves. And I said, it's also about the person. This is the way people think. This is the way people feel. It's like, I'm not crazy about Gone with the Wind. But having said that, how dare I be bold enough to try to rewrite history because I don't like it? And if Gone with the Wind didn't exist, I wouldn't be sitting here right now because Hattie McDaniel was the one who opened doors for me.
She was the Louisa Hemphill who looked at her parents and got put in her place.
Or if you read something like The Jungle Book or something like that, I'm not crazy about what Rudyard Kipling wrote, but again, the lack of knowledge is the thing that creates the ignorance. And to ban something like, I think somebody was trying to ban Harper Lee. They were trying to ban Nabokov. They were trying to ban Lolita. If you read that book, Nabokov is not glorifying pedophilia. He's getting into the head of the way this person thinks. So for people, and I've had this argument with certain people about that, cancellation culture. How dare you try to do that? How dare you try to rewrite it because you don't like it? You don't like it, put the damn thing down, go home.
What do?
I write the way I want, and I've had arguments with people about this. I don't care. And it's like, obviously there has to be, again, if the writers themselves, if the actors themselves don't take chances and write about different kinds of things, you are now keeping yourself in a box. And I'm not saying that it's easy. It's not easy. I don't say that easily because, as you said, even though I continue to write the way I write, there are people who may not do my work at this, certain works of mine. I'm still going to do it.
But we have a generation of kids growing up in an environment in universities where you have this absolute divide about cultural appropriation and so on. How do you broaden the spectrum?
I'm getting ready to do that because I'm getting ready to teach a course at the new school called Playing the Other, where I have kids of different genders, different ethnic, racial backgrounds interview each other and play and write about each other and play each other. Sit down, and I'm giving them permission to be uncomfortable to talk about this stuff because, again, it needs to be spoken about. And if we're going to use art not just as entertainment, but as a form of education and as a form of a tool to challenge, you have to ask the questions.
Doing this show in an environment where the killings keep coming, has it taken a toll on you?
I have to rest sometimes, yes. And I have to pull away from people, yes. Yeah.
But it still needs to be done.
Still needs to be done, but I mean, I'm not a martyr, but again, like I said, I hope, I'm not trying to change, but I'm saying, I'm hoping that my individualism adds to the collective. And if that person chooses, or those people choose to use that, I hope I've done a good job. And for those who don't want to use it, I understand it does not work for you. Yeah? But what I'm doing is not messianic by any stretch of the imagination, no.
But it's a step.
I hope. Thank you. I hope. Yeah.
It is now slightly after 6 o'clock.
Gotta stop.
We have to stop because Dael has an obligation elsewhere,
Yeah.
and I want to thank you very much.
I want to thank you for having me here. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.